Hey everybody, and welcome to another Chairman of the Board Top 10 video. Today I'm talking about my top 10 interactive Euro games. So generally speaking, I find this subject interesting because usually us Eurogamers don't like that traditional head-to-head, confrontational, destructive level of interaction that a lot of board games utilise. We generally like something a bit more nuanced and a bit more delicate when it comes to interacting with the other players. And some of these games, the way the interaction is used, I find very interesting indeed. But before I get started on these 10 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer. And if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 10, I have Cala Mala. So Cala Mala is an area majority game where you are competing on numerous fronts, and the order in which these different areas are resolved is predetermined, so you can have a look at the order in which everything's going to be triggered. Now, the gameplay itself is very simple and what you're trying to do is very simple, but the action selection system, to me, is fascinating and obviously where the player interaction lies. So basically you have a 3x3 grid of actions you can take, and between each action you have kind of a worker placement spot, I suppose, which will trigger the two adjacent actions to where you've just placed your worker disc. Now, these different actions are simple things such as, collecting resources, building in different regions. These little things like you'd probably expect a game like this to have. But the twist and where the interaction lies is that when you play a disc on a particular spot and somebody else has already been there, you'll take your action and then the player below you will then resolve their action, and there can even be a third one in the stack which will then resolve their action. So it has this kind of domino effecting, and sometimes you might even go to the same spot several times in a row and get back-to-back actions yourself. And because timing is such a huge part in this game, you really do have to factor in the order in which these actions are being resolved, because you might think, you know what, I'm going to go for this majority, but then you don't consider that somebody else can go after you and then snatch that majority back. So this game is one where even if it's not your turn, you are fully immersed and engaged and always having actions just popped off, and you don't really have any room to disassociate with the game. So I love the fact that the game itself is so simple, but the action selection system is just that compelling, and definitely the shining star of this game. So a wonderful game that you can get played in around 75 minutes. Great timing comes into play here, a great tempo to the game as well, and it's just a wonderful design. So that is Cala Mala at number 10. At number 9, I have Lancaster. So Lancaster is a more traditional worker placement style game, as you have a little force of knights that you're deploying onto the map. These knights can be upgraded in terms of their strength. And the importance of that is that when you place your worker in this game, those actions are not resolved instantly, because the other players have potential to kick you off those spots by placing a stronger knight there, or even bolstering their strength of knights with these little squire pieces. So you're always kind of jockeying for position to get to the spots you want. You need to know how much to invest in these spots to secure your position there. So it is actually quite confrontational in the way that you are kicking people off the spots you want, and so on. And there's also an amazing level of interaction here where the more you collect these noble tokens on the map, which will not only score you points for endgame in terms of a sliding scale, but they'll give you voting power when it comes to voting for these game-breaking laws that will come into play each round. So you can use these laws to help you or hurt your opponents. Sometimes you have to leverage and even combine your voting powers with the other players to know that, you know what, this player's really going to benefit from this law, so we need to work together to prevent them from doing so. And there's even another layer of interaction when it comes to fighting off these invading forces with a simple area majority system where you want to be contributing the most power of knights to fight off these threats. And if you don't, you can even end up collecting these kind of shame markers which will score you negative points. So every piece of the game here you are rubbing shoulders with the other players, but it mainly does go back to that idea of kicking people off the spots that you want, and vice versa. So yeah, a really interesting game, and I think that level of that more confrontational level mixed with a more Eurofied worker placement game is a very good combo. So that is Lancaster at number 9. At number 8, I have Brussels 1893, which is another worker placement game, but this game certainly does have systems within systems, and each level or layer of the game involves a heavy degree of player interaction. So not only do you have that passive Euro player interaction in terms of rushing for the worker placement spots that you want, the position of these worker placement spots is equally important, because whenever you place a worker in this worker placement grid, you have to assign at least one coin to it. Now, the importance of that is that whoever has the most money in each column of these worker placement spots will contribute towards a majority to get quite a powerful end of round bonus. So you are competing on multiple fronts, and on top of that, within that worker placement grid, there are these shields that you can try and compete over in terms of having majorities in squares rather than columns. So you are working this kind of matrix system where you want the worker placement spots you want, the columns of majorities, as well as surrounding these shields. You'll also have these neutral spots where I believe if you put the most workers there, you can end up losing workers to jail and have to spend time to get them out of jail. So everything here is working with each other, and considering there are so many mechanisms going into this game, I think this one might be one of the most streamlined or one of the most harmonious designs that I have in my collection, considering there are so many different things going on. But I love that system within system, the worker placement, the majorities within the majorities, and of course that all depends on what the other players are doing. So a terribly overlooked game. I think this one is getting a reprint this year, so hopefully that's going to inject some life into this one, because it is a stellar design. That is Brussels 1893 at number 8. At number 7, I have the Tower of Babel, and wow, what a unique game this one is. So in its essence, it is an area majority game where you are trying to contribute the most to the wonders of the world as you build them. And you're going to do that through managing this hand of cards. Now, on your turn, you select which one of the builders you want to help build, and then you are going to, all the other players are going to offer you an amount of cards which you can either accept or decline in terms of helping you build that particular piece of the wonder. Now, you can either reject their offers and hopefully do all the work by yourself, and for each piece of that wonder you construct, you will add an influence marker on that particular wonder. But if you reject the other player's offers, then they will get a points for every card that they offered you and was rejected, and they'll even get to keep those cards for later use. Or of course, you can say, I will accept your offers, we'll share the burden together, and then we'll each put our influence markers on those particular wonders. So it really is a trade-off between who is going to have the majority of influence in these wonders when they are completed, in relation to points you're gaining by having your offers rejected. And on top of that, you are competing for these basically these bonus markers whenever you complete a wonder. And you can even, as a player making an offering, say, you know what, I want that control marker. If you don't give it to me, you're not getting any help this round, and therefore you've essentially wasted your turn. This is a very difficult game to grok. It's certainly quite opaque, and it'll take a few games to understand how the systems work. But that level of interaction to me is absolutely fascinating. There's a timing exercise to this, as well as the wonders that take longer to build are worth more points, so you want to trigger them at the right times if you have the majorities. And again, everything is in relation to the offers you're receiving and leveraging those offers just right to make sure that you benefit. So I absolutely love this one. It's a game that's certainly unlike anything else out there, and I recommend it highly. So that is Tower of Babel at number 7. At number 6, I have Brass Birmingham, which is a kind of a network building, resource management, economic game. And the level of interaction here is so interesting because resources in this game are somewhat of a shared commodity. So if I say built a building, I will put some raw materials on there, and as long as my opponent's network connects to my building, they can use my resources. And that is not necessarily a bad thing for me, because as soon as the last resource is removed from a building, then it's going to flip over and start generating me points. So sometimes it's a good strategy just to flood the board with raw materials, knowing that the other opponents are going to use them, and basically remove those resources pretty quickly and start generating you a points engine. So I love that level of interaction. You can kind of do your own thing, or you can become embedded with the other players. And there's also a real tight neediness to get the right spots in your network, to build the right buildings in the right places, etc. So yeah, I love this shared economy of the resources, and that even scales up as the resources become rarer and more valuable in terms of coal, metal, and even beer when it comes to the big points deliveries. So yeah, this one is a classic, a very popular game, and a big portion of that is because of that shared infrastructure of resources. So that is Brass Birmingham at number 6. At number 5, I have Keyflower, which is a hybrid game that utilizes bidding, worker placement, and even tile placement mechanisms. So this one, each round you are going to display a number of these tiles, which are going to be available for auction or bidding essentially, and you're going to bid for them using different coloured meeples. However, these meeples are not assigned to each player, so I think there's blue, red, green, and yellow meeples in the game, but each player has a fair share of each of them. And as soon as you use one of these meeples to bid for a tile, that colour is going to get locked in. So therefore, if I say have the most yellow meeples, it's going to be quite difficult for players to compete with me in terms of yellow, but they might have the most blue meeples. And because you do not have that flexibility to chop and change them, then you need to be quite careful about how you leverage each colour. And not only are you using these meeples to actually bid for the tiles and add them to your own personal display, you can actually use them as workers to utilise the ability on these tiles instantly. And another twist of this is that if you use those workers, they remain on the tile, and whoever wins the auction of that tile will take that worker back into their collection to be used against you later. And it goes beyond this, because later in the game, once you've built your little landscape of tiles you've collected, you can actually use the tiles of other players. You are going to benefit from that to get the ability, but the player whose tile it belongs to is going to also benefit from that because they get to keep the meeples that was used to use their building. So this one has so many kind of layers to the onion in terms of that flow of meeples, the economy, how you are leveraging each of these different meeples and bids. How much are you willing to bid to get the tiles you want? It's just an absolutely fascinating and nuanced, deep game. We gave so many different levels to the strategy here, and this is, for me, is one of the best games of all time. I could have argued to have this one higher on the list, no doubt about that. And for me, this is kind of the sweet spot in how I enjoy player interaction in my games. So this one, over the last few years, it seems to have gone a bit quiet. Not many people are talking about this one anymore, but for me, this one is still one of the best games out there. And if you like those mechanisms, it doesn't really get much better than Keyflower. At number 4, I have Puerto Rico. Now, this is considered one of the classic Euro games, and to me, this one still has one of the most nuanced and sophisticated levels of player interaction that I've ever seen. So this was one of the forefathers that used that action selection system, where you have a bunch of roles available. As the active player, you will choose one of them, but every person will get to use that ability. But the player who selected it will get a slightly improved version of it. Now this one, you are essentially building up your little plantation, you're gaining resources, and then trying to ship those resources off for victory points. That's the gist of it. But timing in this game is so important, in selecting the right role and even piggybacking off the other players, because you have to bear in mind that if you don't select something, there's a good chance that somebody else will, and you might not need that additional benefit from it. And even sometimes when you select particular actions, you can be helping other players more than you. So for example, if say you select the load the boat action, you only have a couple of resources to load onto those ships, but the player next to you has a ton, then they're going to benefit more than you did from your own turn. So it really is about weighing up what is going to benefit you a little bit more than the other players. And I absolutely love that level of interaction. I find it so interesting. And sometimes you have to get into the head of your opponents thinking, you know what, I know you've got a lot of resources. I know you want to ship soon. Therefore, I'm going to guess that you're going to select that action, and I'm going to benefit from it anyway, and put myself into a good position for when that happens. It's a tremendous game, and one that holds up remarkably well. It does get a little bit of bad press at times, saying that there is room for more experienced players to kind of exploit less experienced players, but I think if you've got a basic grasp of how board games work, you'll do perfectly fine with this one. So that is Puerto Rico at number 4. At number 3, I have Panzertonica. Now this is a route building style game, as you are trying to chain as many cities as you can together and have majorities in them as well. And you're going to do that by taking very simple actions, by deploying these markers onto the map and trying to basically complete those routes and establish some presence in the adjacent locations. But I like how you have to invest in improving your engine in this game to make yourself more efficient by having more actions or being able to resupply your bunch of control markers quicker, or even improving the amount of points you're going to get from your longest route. But where the player interaction lies in this game is that you are somewhat incentivized to actively block the other players, because when they decide to kick you off that relevant spot, you get to multiply. So this one, yes, it can feel a little bit nasty at times and you can go out of your way just to slow down your opponents. You're doing that for a very good reason, because again, if people kick you off, you get to spread your markers much quicker. Additionally, you have to be quite careful about which route you complete, because whenever you complete a route, whoever has dominance in the adjacent regions will get additional points. So going to the same space again and again, even though that might improve your engine, it could kind of put the victory on the plate of your opponent, because you just keep giving them points through no effort of their own. So you've got to be very careful about what you're rewarding to the other players. There's a great dynamic kind of flow of this game. Everything is always chopping and changing, always kind of kicking people off spots, and it's just so much fun to play. Very clean, a real throwback to the Euro game genre, but one of the most interactive Euros that I have in my collection because of that blocking mechanism. So that is Panzertonica at number 3. At number 2, I have Barrage. Now Barrage is a game all about trying to convert water into energy and into victory points. And the board itself is essentially this mountain where the water is going to start at the top of the board and flow down, hopefully getting caught in your dams as you go. And you're trying to push it through these conduit systems and convert it into energy through these power stations. Now the game itself is a worker placement game. And as you'd expect with the worker placement game, it has that turn angst in terms of getting to the worker placement spots that you want. And in this game, that is very strong, particularly towards the end of the game as you're trying to get the best conversion spots, because that's going to be where you get most of your points. So it has all that passive player interaction as you'd expect from a Euro game. But for me, what the game is all about and where the interaction lies is in that board system, where as you are building dams and stuff, you have to factor in that other players might later in the game build their dams higher up on the mountain and capture that water before you get a chance to use it. Additionally, you can build your conduits in other players' dams, meaning that in order for them to convert that water into energy, you are the middleman, and every time they use that, you are going to start generating yourself points. So you have this shared infrastructure that becomes quite aggressively competitive as you get more and more money, you get richer, and you build up a better engine for yourself. You can start investing in building the best dams right at the top of the mountain to make sure that you grab all the water before the other players do. You can even get some kind of leakage where where water pools up, it will start flowing over your dams and into the next players. So sometimes you'll still benefit from going lower in the mountain, but of course you are going to get first refusal if you start higher. So I love the way the game progresses and you're creeping up and up and up, and you can even end up chaining your kind of engine together where you will shoot your collected water through your own power stations, which might then collect in your next dam and you can use it again. So this game is so interactive. It is cutthroat to the core, but everything about it just feels right, it feels good. And when you end up kind of outthinking and outmaneuvering your opponents, you just know you're onto a good thing here. So on paper, I shouldn't like this game because I don't like terribly cutthroat games, but this one, it's logical and you're doing what you're doing for a reason. And it's one of the best games I've played in the last 2 or 3 years It is absolutely phenomenal. So that is Barrage at number 2. And finally, at number 1, I have El Grande. So this one might not be a big surprise to my longer term viewers because this is my favourite game of all time. El Grande is the forefather of the area control genre of games, where there are so many, but considering this one is the earliest one, it's still the best one out there. So generally speaking, area control games of this type aren't considered Euros, but this one has a completely different feel to a lot of the other ones out there, because you're not, rushing into people and destroying each other's armies by rolling dice, that kind of stuff. It's all about board manipulation, pushing and pulling units at the right time, and striking when the iron is hot. So basically, everything you do in this game is dependent on the other players, knowing when to set up for second or third place, knowing when to go all in on a region, using the Castillo mechanism, which is this kind of this blind bidding system to your benefit, using another simultaneous selection system to try and hijack majorities on the board. And it's all used through this card system where initially you are playing these initiative cards to prioritize turn order, because play the higher card, it means you're going to get the best action card. But that comes with a caveat of, if you play high cards, you're going to have a fewer amount of caballeros, which are essentially your control units, into your supply. So you need to strike a balance between the two. Go all in on the high cards, you're going to have very few units to deploy. So it's all about trying to know when to take the best cards, or know when to settle for ones that maybe aren't so good. And it's just such a wonderful and compelling game. It plays in around 90 minutes. The leveraging of spots on the map is great. There's some golden rules that just completely turn the game on its head by moving the actual Grande around, because if you move the Grande to a different region, you can only ever deploy to regions adjacent to the Grande, which of course can be used to your benefit. So again, one of the most interactive things or games I've ever played. Everything you do is concerns the other players. You're always assessing the board, knowing what to do at the right time. So a phenomenal game. It's my number 1 board game of all time. What else can I say other than that? Just a masterpiece. So that is El Grande at number 1. So there we have it. That's another top 10 list. Hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Please let me know your suggestions of interactive Euros, because I'd love to hear your opinion. Now, if you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel. And for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye-bye.